Welcome, everyone. As I was saying to those who joined a little earlier, I was a little worried about rescheduling this again, because every time we tried to hold this workshop, some global upheaval occurred. So I'm sort of relieved to have gotten to the start of this workshop, and as far as I know, everything's going okay today. Thanks for hanging in there on this Telemachus project through this very complicated time. Pandemic edition. So in a minute, I'll put up the slides and stuff, but this workshop, as originally planned, was meant to be on the theme of transitions. And we will continue on that. Of course, that theme became extremely, what can we say, relevant somehow, very salient to all of us as we faced together a very unexpected external transition provoking experience. But I hope that you'll use this time to reflect or talk about any aspect of transitions. It doesn't have to be preoccupations related to the pandemic, although if that's what you want to think about, that's totally fine too. So it's totally fine if we don't say the C word here today, but we can if you want. It would be understandable, certainly. So through various iterations of the planning of this workshop, Michelle and John and I had been sort of planning to do this together, and then last time we set it up, it was going to be Miriam subbing for Michelle, and now it's Michelle subbing for Miriam, subbing for Michelle. So we're glad to have Michelle and John here with this, and thank you, Heather, for getting everything organized, and the rest of the steering committee and facilitator volunteers. So we're going to talk about transitions. We're going to do this in a kind of accelerated way compared to the normal, our professional opinion. So we're going to have brief discussions, and we're going to leave enough time at the end to talk about how we're going to finish off the Telemachus project. Originally this would have been the end of it, but because we're out of now we're out of the normal rhythm, we're going to discuss at the end with your input how we're going to tie this up. Are there any questions or anything like that? You received some documents for reflection. Maybe you reflected 3 times, or maybe you reflected once, like 3 months ago, and you forget what you thought about. It doesn't matter, whatever worked. I'm going to put up the slides if I can here.
I go now. I need a place to work.
And if you're not speaking, Nader, turn off your microphone. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. You have to give me power, Heather.
Oh, yes, sorry.
No problem.
Hold on just a minute.
It's a good idea to keep me on a short leash. It still says I'm on now. Here we go. All right. Okay. You could read my email, or I could find the. There we are. Okay. So hopefully you can maybe see my screen. Let me turn it into something that you can actually follow. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here and for hanging with us through this adventure. We're going to start with actually hearing a story from John about his career, which I hopefully will help you kind of prompt you to think a little bit about the story of your career, whether it's short or long. And then we're going to have a very brief introduction from me on career transitions, and then time for a small group discussion. The questions we'll be using are the questions at the very end of the package that you got. And then we're going to switch gears, because transitions involve, in some sense, negotiation, and Michelle's going to take us through kind of an approach to that relates to this idea of career transition. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have time at the end, I hope, to discuss kind of the way we're going to try to finalize the Telemachus program for this class. So none of us have any commercial interest to disclose. Our only interest is in the success of the Telemachus program. All right. So the goals are here, to do with thinking about personal and situational factors around career transitions, and to think about strategies for approaching anticipated transitions and navigating unexpected transitions. And then the second part, as I mentioned, Michelle's going to take us through self-advocacy, managing up, and related ideas about how to negotiate for yourself. So this is Charles Sherrington, who's a famous physiologist. I beg your pardon, Charles Sherrington, who was a famous physiologist at Oxford back in the day. And here's another famous physiologist who I'm going to turn the microphone over to tell us his story as a kind of introductory segment. John, take it away.
Okie dokie. So we'll just switch screens here. All right. So just a disclaimer to start with, I'm really not advocating my journey as a strategy or formula for successful career planning. It's just perhaps one path of others that I could have traveled down depending on circumstances. And I think, like all journeys, there's not a lot of strategic planning involved. It's really a series of opportunities and perhaps personal choices that begot other opportunities and choices. And I think in a sense, my journey, like most of yours, it's perhaps the journey itself that's the rewarding and interesting part. And the actual destination in the end is sort of icing on the cake. So I think and I've had to do a little bit of thinking about this now that this is the second year I've done this, to think about what motivated me. And if you read any sort of standard psychology textbooks on this topic, you'll find that career journeys usually start with understanding your own interests and motivations, what you're looking for in a position, and why. And I think you can usually break down these motivations into 5 or 6 different fundamentals. There's usually 1 or 2 of them being perhaps the one that guides you the most. And for example, there's achievement. You want to improve yourself and accomplish something meaningful in life. And who values collaboration over other kinds of competition. It could be power. You really like to be energized by the status of the position. You favor recognition and control over your environment. The other is autonomy, where you seek control over your own work and direction. So you like to be a private business person or a professor, if you view it in the sense that we run our own labs, or a clinician and you run your own clinical practice. There's also purpose. You sometimes want to be part of something larger than yourself. And perhaps the last one, and one of the most important ones that drives us, is job satisfaction. Although until you get into a job, you really don't know if it's satisfying or not. But you have some good ideas and you want to implement them, and so you want to get something out of that job. So these motivations were not the ones that I was consciously thought about when I was thinking about my career. But a lot of them actually have evolved over time, after acquiring experiences and gradually understanding myself better, what I was good at and what I was not good at. But one must really start somewhere, the seed that starts the ball rolling to get you on that path that you travel down. And my seed or spark was none of the above. It was more disappointment. And it really originated after CJEP. And it really had 2 phases. So the first phase was that I was interested in biology and life, and I wanted to get into medical school. And so I applied to the Med-P program, and I actually got an interview at McGill, but that didn't pan out. I guess I didn't come across as very sophisticated. And so I, like most students in that time, decided, well, I'll just do an undergraduate degree in one of the biomedical sciences, and then I'll apply to medical school afterwards. And in fact, I started out registering in physiology, but then after the first year, I actually dropped out of physiology and went to the biology program. I don't think I told my department that, or if I have, it's a secret. But and the reason I did that was because even though I enjoyed physiology, I really, as a kid, but I liked to tinker things and to figure out how things worked. And I thought the biology program that I majored in cell, molecular, and developmental biology because I liked the nuts and bolts of how things worked at that time. And so I went in and got my bachelor's degree in biology. And then I had the second disappointment, and that I remember walking out of the last exam and I felt a sense of accomplishment, but I felt disappointed because I have a Bachelor of Science and I don't feel like a scientist. I just knew the diagrams. I didn't have a real intuitive sense of how life worked. I could read it and understand it, but it didn't, didn't gel because I hadn't really done any experimental work. And so that motivated me at that point to go to graduate school. And then I would apply to medical school after that. And I'm not sure my marks were that high enough at that stage to get into medical school, but I really wanted to understand science a little bit better. So I applied and I ended up going to Queen's University. And the other motivating factor in graduate school that shaped a lot of how I've evolved is that another, I guess almost a third disappointment, is that when I, at the undergraduate level, I more or less did not participate much in all the things that university life has to offer. And I felt another sense of disappointment that I sort of squandered those years, perhaps because I lived at home, I'm not really sure. But I didn't get involved in a lot of things at university. So I decided when I went to graduate school, I was going to get much more involved in university life. And so thankfully, I had a very understanding supervisor, and I became our departmental rep for the Graduate Student Society. And that's where I got involved in a lot of things that were of concern to graduate students. TA-ships back then, stipends, working conditions, they were a lot less well-defined as they are today. There were a few roles, and there was a lot of abuse going on about how students were treated. And so that got me very involved in the Graduate Student Society. And before you knew it, I was the vice president and president of the Graduate Student Society at Queen's. And what that afforded me was, in fact, I got more involved in the university than I ever imagined that I would at that stage of my life. I was on faculty of graduate studies, I was on the university senate, I was on the board of governors, and I really got a sense of how the university operated from that. And I was involved in a number of initiatives to improve graduate student life. And I also got involved actually in what is Queen's equivalent of Grad Club or Thompson House. So I was also involved in the social side of that. So I think my supervisor was a little concerned I might have spread myself a little too thin, but obviously I did graduate, and actually I had several papers for my PhD, 7 to 9 papers. So I think he was happy in the end. It just took me a little bit longer to finish. But then confidence in time management, although my supervisor may have thought that. Team management, because I had to organize a lot of different things. Public speaking, debating topics. So those were very valuable skills that I probably would never have gotten from any other kind of activity. And so when I came to McGill, I was fortunate enough actually to get a job at McGill. And I at that point, I was totally hooked on research. I just love the idea of figuring things out in puzzles. And I realized that that's one of my driving motivations, is figuring out how things work. And I found that research was a great outlet for that. And that's what drove me more than perhaps I would say at that time clinical care, although that's also evolved over time too. But at McGill, I decided that while my first career priority was to actually get tenure and get my research going and that sort of thing, but I also decided that I wasn't going to sit back and let things happen, that I wanted to get more involved. And so I immediately, when I was in the department, I was the first molecular biologist. And I got involved in the graduate program based on my experience as a graduate student and all that experience, and trying to improve the graduate program. I eventually became director of our graduate program in the department. I also got involved outside the university. I got involved in the Canadian Society for Biochemistry, Molecular and Cellular Biology, which now is a shorter name. I think it's the Canadian Society for Molecular Biosciences. And again, it was just being a member, a council member. Before I knew it, I was, after a few years, I was president of the Canadian Society for Molecular Biosciences. And again, that exposed me to a much broader perspective on academic and scientific life in Canada. And because of all the experience I had as a graduate student, that really helped me face those different responsibilities I had at a national level and also within my own department. And of course, as many of you know, I became chair of our department because I had a lot of other ideas and things that I wanted to do. And they now, all those motivations I talked about earlier about achievement, about purpose, job satisfaction, all those motivations start to come into play as to why I wanted to become chair of my own department. And so I think if there is a take-home message, I think it's really expedient to, while one can sort of just focus on a very narrow career path and follow the highway from A to B, I think if I have any advice would be just to eventually take some of those side roads off the main highway and experience some different things, because you never know what kind of opportunities will arise. I think one of the wonderful things that I experienced from this career is the number of wonderful people I've met along the way. And those individuals really do enrich your whole experience in your career. I think that probably was the most value I've gotten out of this. And it makes you enjoy your job that much more. And so the old adage is, as they've said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So step out of your box and sample a little bit of what life has to offer. And in the end, you'll be a much richer person for it. So those are my 2 cents worth, or nickel now. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks for sharing that story. I think hopefully that sets people up in their thinking, because this is basically about evolution of careers over time, or narrative, and you're the star in your own narrative. And the plot twists come, you know, from the inside, but also from the inside. And I mean, John's an example, but we all have stories we could tell, and I guess we'll have a chance to do that in the next little bit. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. Sorry for the jumping about. First I have to find what happened to my PowerPoint. Here it is. Okay, so just to make a few general remarks, although John caught up, kind of gave you an overview of some of the things that are highly pertinent, as though he's been to this workshop before. In a way, this is kind of coming around to some things that we talked about early on in the Telemachus program, when we talked about values and goals and what drives people and what's important to you. And the main thing to think about in relation to change, at least the things that I took away from my reading and thinking about this topic, is that change is completely normal. Sometimes, especially high achieving types who end up as faculty members at McGill, there's this idea that you're kind of going through steps and steps, and eventually you're going to arrive. And some junior faculty may think they're on some next journey, and you're going to keep going through steps. There's no arriving. There's just new opportunities and challenges. And the other thing to keep in mind is it's not just you who's dealing with adjusting to change or adapting to change or planning change. Everyone around you at any time is going through changes too, or thinking about whether they should make a change or how they're going to survive a change that's been imposed upon them. Not just in this dramatic way as we're all experiencing right now, but always. And given that change is a feature that we're all dealing with, it's good to be sort of prepared to deal with it and to plan for it. And to remember that when things are volatile, that actually brings opportunity to the prepared. So you can think about making changes and identifying when there's a need for change, and then figuring out when and how to make those changes. And that's going to be some of what we'll talk about, especially in the second half of this session. And the other thing to know is that change involves predictable challenges. And so you don't have to just be kind of a victim of it or wander through it. You can actually get relevant skills and help to successfully navigate change and know what's coming in some sense, so that you're more confident about dealing with it, which will make you more successful, whatever that success means to you. So just to say in general that career trajectories, as I say, people often think of it as kind of one upward arrow, and that is obviously completely unlikely. First of all, there are many components to your career. There are even more components to your life, and the sort of trajectory of those is bound to be complicated. And one area, maybe things may be going well, in other areas they may be going sideways and not so well, and these things are not necessarily all running together, and you may need to make trade-offs and prioritize. And I think that's sort of obvious, but it's worth keeping in mind. And as John was suggesting, every fork that you see is a possibility. And so it's interesting to think about those forks in the road and whether or not you should be taking them maybe in a more conscious way than sometimes we do, sort of wandering forward, following some standard path may not actually be optimal, and some external indicator of success may not be relevant to you when you stop to think about it. So you can think about change in terms of planning for it. And Michelle's going to pick up on this theme later, the idea of strategic planning for yourself, asking if I'm going to make a change, what are my competitive advantages? What do I want to do? What are my values? What are my goals? John talked about that evolution, that's not necessarily always the same over your life, where the priorities or emphasis may shift. And doing a so-called gap analysis, where you are now and where do you want to be and how do you get there? And what will it cost to pursue a particular goal in a particular way, and is that a cost you're willing to pay? The other thing that's interesting to think about with career development is that it's an ongoing process. As I mentioned, you don't ever just arrive. And there's a phrase called career renewal that is an interesting one, that suggests that no matter what stage of your career, it's good to be keeping yourself ready for new opportunities, whether that's new opportunities in your actual work or new opportunities in your life more generally. Or a kind of broader scope, as John was mentioning. So people often go from a more narrow prioritization of, let's say, your own lab or your own research activity or your own clinical development to broader goals such as national or international organizations or community service or other such things. One thing that you can do is, even if you can't change your current job, if you're looking to change, is you can ask yourself, how could I make the job I have now more interesting or more enriching? And people have proposed that one way to do that is to write an ideal job description for the work you do now, and then figure out which parts of that you could implement in your current work. And academic work has a ton of flexibility, and there's actually more possibility there than you might think. And then, of course, we have to make a plug for mentoring as one of the ways that you can sort of expand the scope of your career and see different perspectives and possibilities. Okay, well, there's career planning and there's life preparedness. So if there was ever flexible, it's now. And there's an idea here called self-diversification, which is the idea of having a sort of a diversified skill set so that you're ready when conditions change. And also you're not trapped in a narrow kind of definition of who you are. And actually, clinical medicine is terrible for this, that physicians define themselves as doctors in a way that really sets their sort of self-worth, I suppose. And they, as a result, have difficulty ever retiring because they can't give up on that aspect of themselves. They don't have another set of selves to turn to. If they lose that definition, it's sort of a threat to their core identity. So it's something to think about, to have kind of a broad portfolio in order to be able to have more opportunities as your career develops. And then the idea of being able to manage and cope with change, I don't think needs to be emphasized. I think we're living that at the moment. But one thing that is worth keeping in mind is that change is difficult, whether you make the change or the change is happening and you're reacting to it. It's completely normal that it's hard and that you're facing uncertainty and challenges and are not sure of yourself. And not only is that normal to be happening to you, but it's happening to everyone around you who's going through these kinds of changes, whether it's in a dramatic condition like our current state or in general. And that you're gonna be more successful if you set conditions for success. So I'm gonna stop with that blah, blah. And I guess invite for 1 second, if there's any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat or speak up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see more faces. What we're going to do now is put people into the Zoom rooms for a discussion. There will be a facilitator in every room, and facilitators were using the set of questions that's on the last page of the handout that was sent out. Oops. Discussion 1, although of course you're welcome to take your discussion in whatever direction you like. And then we'll come back and just have a few quick thoughts from the groups about these points that we'd like you to talk about. Sound okay? So we're going to divide into 5 groups. and we'll see who you end up with. It's not your usual group. It's just potluck. And we'll meet back here in about 20 minutes. Is that okay, Heather? Can you give us 20 minutes?
I can. Yes, of course.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Be really, really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a super interesting talk in my group. I'm trying to stay sort of on time, although our schedule was a little bit had some flexibility built in. So I'm just going to take like, if I spend another 5 minutes, Michelle, is that going to work, do you think?
I think so.
Yeah. So maybe 5 minutes. I have a few slides that I could show you that are kind of the literature on this transition stuff. But maybe I would rather hear just 2 or 3 like pearls. Any pearls come from the Michelle?
We had some great ones, people, and sorry, Tanya, that you got sort of the short end of that discussion, but we still get some really nice pearls. A couple of things that came out that I hadn't sort of thought about explicitly is this idea that even in planned transitions, there are unplanned things that always end up happening. And so the ability to be flexible, the idea of finding mentors and not being passive about it, but really going out and finding more than one came out as being really key in supporting people in their transitions. That mentors, building relationships. And then the other thing is in our group, we actually had people who transitioned not only in career, but across the world several times. And so the idea of having to adapt culturally as well came up, which was really an interesting one that I hadn't considered, having been born and bred in Montreal.
You just walk around Côte des Neiges and adapt culturally every block. Okay, Leah, were you leading a group? I'm not
Yes,
sure who's
I
facilitating.
was. I think to add to what Michelle just said, just not necessarily just adapting culturally, but the big impact, as one of our colleagues mentioned, was adapting to the language. And that in itself is a big transition when you're coming over to Quebec, right? And some aspect of every transition, we change our role from an expert to a novice. And what does that all entail, and how does that, impact our pride, our ego, our sense of comfort, little things that was mentioned, similar to what Michelle was saying, little things like, who do I ask to get the key to my office? Like as little as that could be, right? It kind of just changes your whole world. So it's, you always feel like sometimes it's a new restart. I think what was also mentioned, similar to Michelle, was, those of us who have traveled the world and have gone back and forth and have negotiated, they just wish they had this course back then. So they had a mentor so they can help them negotiate in the right way. They did it, and they seemed anyway, they were smiling in the group, and they seemed content of their choices. But they would have wished that they would have had a mentor to kind of help them through this whole negotiations. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm not sure, Anne, were you directing a group or facilitating a group, I guess?
Yes, I was, Leslie. Well, we concentrated on transitions of really the dreaded C word of what we've just been going through, sort of, sharing and different things linked with it. And basically, we were all trying to find something positive which came out of it. And we have some positive things that we see out of it, in that we realized without having to rush from one place to another for meetings, we suddenly had a little bit more time. And with this more time, we were able to actually have a better overview and to be able to discuss with different people, and sort of interact. And for mentoring, we felt that, everybody sort of linking in with other people was so important during these transitions. So you had multiple mentors, for want of a better way. And like even to having departmental meetings with people coming together and sharing ideas and discussing, it led to sort of ways that we didn't have these different aspects before. And it also sort of, for some of us, it highlighted certain sort of characteristics that we didn't necessarily realize we had, but we were again trying to turn them into more positive things. So from the team I was with, did I miss anything? Rebecca, Arpana, Sasha? Nope. Okay, very good.
Okay, thanks. Just probably John, you're the other,
Yep.
the other facilitator.
So yeah, our group had the range or the gamut of career transitions, everything from a junior faculty member who, after a few years, decided to negotiate with her chair a different role for herself in the department from the one she was hired in, to a faculty member who in mid-career has now decided to change his research direction and in terms of the projects, but there's a lot of stress that's associated with that, to taking on another individual taking on a higher responsibility, initially not wanting it, but evolving into it. So that was the challenges of that. And another person who, for personal reasons, had to step away from her academic career, I believe, or job, to a different job on a part-time basis, but then had the courage to jump back into the academic stream and all those hurdles that go with that. So we really covered the whole gamut of possible types of career transitions. The positive thing that comes out of that is that everybody's happy with the way they made their decisions. And so despite the challenges, nobody's regretting those decisions. So I think that also says something for not fearing where you might end up or where you want to go. Things will work out at the end.
Thanks. In my group, we picked up on a couple of the themes you just mentioned. One was the sort of trade-off of between excitement for the sort of exciting part of a change and a new challenge, and the stress and fear and anxiety that can come with that, and how to maximize the former and minimize the latter. The other was the importance of mentorship, but also in this particular moment, the challenge of getting it, because you're not bumping into people in the hallways. You need to set up a meeting if you need mentorship. So I guess I encourage people to go ahead and set those up. And then the last was that you have to manage your resources. And people in our discussion mentioned that they noticed that particularly these days where resources are somehow less, whether that's energy or sanity or whatever it is, and that you have to prioritize when you're managing your resources under these conditions. Okay, so a lot of wisdom here. I'm going to return to sharing my screen because I don't want to go through a big slideshow, but I want one graphic, and then I want to set things up so that Michelle can pick up on her side of this. Here it is. All right. So we just did that. I don't want to get into this. I encourage you, the slide deck was sent out, I think, with the invitation. And so if you want to look at some of the details, or if you want to read some of the material on my courses, there's some of the reading, background reading, which is pretty interesting stuff, actually. What I wanted to talk about, I'll mention this, that any transition has features to it, transitions within transitions. Ending of a prior identity and beginning of a new. And that's an interesting experience. And then this is the figure I wanted to show you, because this is kind of a cartoon of these kinds of the evolution of a transition. And just to point out that it's not a straight line. It's completely normal that you go through all kinds of emotional experiences through a major transition, and that not all transitions work out, and you may need to backtrack and or take a different turn to end up really where you want to be. And that it's usual for things to be choppy, rocky for a period of time while you're figuring out what the heck you're doing in this new role, as you hopefully end up in a place where you're moving forward. But I think it's a useful graphic to kind of remember that it's a very rare transition that is seamless. And the other thing to remember is wherever you are on this kind of a picture, the people around you are often in these situations too. And for example, in our faculty, there's 30 or so departments, and chairs serve for 5 to 10 years. So at any given time, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or more department chairs who are brand new at the job, just as one example, and who are, who knows, probably in some slump down here trying to figure out what the heck. So to be, I guess, aware of the transitional stages of other people and try to help them and mentor them no matter what your level of seniority or juniority is in some sense. Okay, I'm going to stop talking, I think, and hand this over to Michelle. I guess, Michelle, you talk and I'll advance your slides. Is that okay?
Exactly.
Okay.
And just to come back to what Leslie was saying at the beginning, is that whenever you are either, contemplating a change, so a change that you're planning for yourself or a change that is happening to you, there has to be this ability to think about, articulate, and speak for the things that you need in order to be successful in the change, right? We were talking about in my group before about knowing what the resources are, but it's sometimes a little bit more than that, and you have to be able to advocate for yourself. Next slide, please. Just to say that the slides were adapted from work that Dr. Jeff Wiseman did. So change can be that we initiate or that happens to us. Next. And I think that really, this idea of advocating for yourself through the changes and however these changes come about, it's not necessarily about putting your interests above all others. So it's not a selfish process, but it's rather supporting you in your development within the structure and along with your colleagues. Again, coming back to the idea that Leslie was saying, is that you are in the process of a transition or a change or something happening, but the people around you frequently are as well. In this COVID time, clearly we've all been dealing with this, similar transitions at the same time, but it's been affecting us very differently. And one of the ways that you can think about that, for example, is how it affected the clinicians versus how it affected the researchers, and how these things can work together, even though it's the same change that's happening to us both. It's the same process, the same change. Next, please. So self-advocacy, it really requires you to be able to think about what you want and to be able to articulate what you want clearly and say, how do I frame what I want? And by deciding what your goals and values are, and coming back to the work that we did in earlier sessions, you can really start thinking about how to articulate what you want, because you've already decided what's important to you. It also requires an ability to what we call manage up. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And it requires some effective negotiation skills, which we're going to really just cut the surface on in this presentation as well. And these are transferable skills, and whether you're taking on a new administrative position, whether you're looking for additional resources, whether you want to develop a new project, whether you need to ramp up or ramp down your work in some way, these skills, the ability to describe what you want, understand how to manage up, and effectively negotiate that, are transferable no matter what. And this comes back to the idea of life preparedness rather than preparing for change, and using these skills in a transferable manner. Next. So what is managing up? Next, please. So really, how to manage up is defining what you really care about, again, and it's really being clear about how you articulate that. Understanding what your leader, and I use that term leader sort of very loosely. It could be your clinical boss. It could be, your department chair. It could be the dean. It could be whoever it is that holds the purse strings, the ability to reallocate resources. Whoever it is that person is, you need to understand what they care about and what they're on the line for, right? They're responsible to somebody as well. And you need to understand where they're coming from, so that you can then try to see how you can align what you're looking for with what they're looking for. If you can say, if I'm successful in what I'm trying to do with this change, it will make you more successful in this area, that ability to align will make it much more likely that they will support the change or the transition that you're considering. Building trust with your leader is, also part of managing up. And this takes place in little ways. If you're going to do something and you say you're going to do it, then do it, follow through, and feed that back, because then they know that you're good for the work that you say you're going to do. And if they're going to go out there and support you in the transition or change you're discussing, then you're going to follow through and you're going to be successful because you're going to put in the work that you say you're going to. And to see your leader as part of your team and not somebody that's fighting against you, but really somebody who's there to support your development, your growth, and where you're trying to go, as opposed to a battle. Thank you. Next slide. And so once you've been able to sort of think about these things and you're starting to articulate them, you want to think a little bit about this negotiation iceberg. And this is, you know, the idea that what people see in terms of negotiation discussions, the issues that come up, is often the part of the iceberg that's above the waterline. Whereas everything else, their interests, their positions, all of these things are under the surface. And really, in order to be successful, next slide, please. If you can find really what their positions and interests are, and not just the superficial issues that people are discussing, you may find this area of central overlap. And once you can find that commonality, you are then more likely to find alignment in that negotiation, or a win-win situation, as we talk about. Next, please. And that's the zone of agreement that we talk about. Next. So again, this I think the more complete resource for this is in the My Courses, but this is just a nice little way of thinking about negotiation. The ABCDs, 2 A's, B's, C, D's: assure safety and dignity, anticipate potential agreements, behold, so listen actively to each other in turn. And this one, I know I've joked with other people. My husband always says that the opposite of listening is not, the opposite of talking is not waiting, it's listening. Not waiting for your turn to talk, but to actually listen to what the other person is saying. I do actually get along with my husband very well, but he's a smart man. Brainstorm and share ideas for possible agreements. Collaborate on implementation of an agreement. Check back to ensure everything went as planned. Detect and disarm dirty tricks. Like, you're not there to try and pull the rug out from somebody else. And then debrief, if you can, what went well and how can we do this differently. And the reason that there's this second in this ability to get under the surface of that iceberg and anticipate potential agreements, that's where the bulk of the work is. You really want to be able to think deeply and have these preliminary discussions so that going into the initial negotiation, you have you're not starting from just that surface level. So this really takes most of the time and effort, and the actual negotiation, the sit down talk, is not the time to be trying to dig for these things necessarily. That's pre-work in a way. I would say next slide, but I saw that there was a question or a comment that went up, and Leslie, I'm not sure how you want to do that. Oh, you may understand these steps are necessary, but what if the person you are negotiating with doesn't know the ABCDs? Fair enough. I think, you know, we hope that by doing these workshops, and we certainly have had other workshops on conflict resolution and negotiation, it is a discussion, and I think going into it again with the best of intentions and saying, I'm not here to fight, I'm here to find a win-win solution, disarms people and allows for that deeper discussion. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment about that. Maybe we'll just go to the next slide and then we'll come back to the questions or comments afterwards. Is there a next slide? Okay, so that was it in terms of the slides. Leslie, I don't know if you want to just get at a couple of the chats, or?
Yeah, I have to get out of my sharing so I can see the chats. Oh, there's all kinds of good advice. Beth, did you want to give good advice in person rather than in text?
No,
There's always one.
I think Sasha had said sometimes the person you're negotiating with doesn't have any time, they're short on time. And I just said that maybe you could use that to your advantage, because preparation seems to be an important part of it, so you can come prepared and sort of use dirty tricks. Yeah.
No.
Well, the dirty trick of preparation where they're not
Preparation, that's not
think
dirty.
through and identify something that would be win-win for them. But I think that the way people operate can be very complex. Like some people are relatively straightforward and open-minded, but you will be dealing with people who have a very strong agenda that they want to push through, and they've given you, 10 minutes for your review or whatever. And so I think I find that it would be difficult to sit down and try to put all this wonderful ABCDs to work. There's lots of times when you will be able to implement them, but it would be interesting to try to think of a quick and dirty version of the ABCD.
I'm a little worried by the repeated use of the word dirty.
Sorry, didn't mean that.
I think one thing is even just to recognize that you are negotiating, because often people are, we negotiate everything. We're grown-ups who don't have to do too many things. It's a negotiation most of the time. So I encourage that even when someone's told you to do something, it's probably still a negotiation, and that they need something from you. And if you need something in return, then you may well be in a position to discuss. And it is an academic environment where there is meant to be collegial interaction. So I don't think there's anything wrong with showing people how a negotiation could be carried out in a respectful and thoughtful manner. It may be not in the moment. Maybe you need to say, we need time to think this through. We need to meet again.
Yeah, it's rarely a successful negotiation, and it's interesting because in previous versions of this workshop, we actually put people together and have get them to have a negotiation, party A and party B. And one of the limitations of that kind of role play is really that a negotiation almost never happens in a one-step process. And I think that that's what's important to understand, is that there's a lot of pre-work, and sometimes that pre-work are pre-discussions, because again, without understanding where the person you are negotiating with is coming from, you may not understand that the reason they're saying no is not because they don't like you, is because they actually just can't for a variety of reasons at this time, but an alternate that might be a good plan B could be, right? And looking for those win-win solutions. But it's rarely a one-step process, unless you're supremely lucky or the issue is extremely simple.
Any other tips from anyone who's successfully negotiated something? I'm sure you all have. You do. I mean, most people are better negotiators than they think. You just don't call it capital N negotiation and go in with your lawyers and stuff.
I would actually like to hear people's stories of failure in a way, because like I can think of times when people have even quit academia, because they had somebody who is their supervisor who, like, I guess the point is everything is not a complete failure or complete success, probably, because it's negotiation, but there were people, I know of people who've left academia either because they couldn't negotiate, or they had negotiating skills, but their supervisor or boss didn't and wasn't interested in developing them. So, I mean, maybe I'm the only person who's been 15 years in academia and has witnessed that. I would love to know that somebody else had, otherwise there must be something wrong with me.
I want to add something on negotiation. That part of it is also kind of like was mentioned, was the preparedness for negotiation. Also, kind of put yourself in the shoes of someone that you're negotiating with, and then what would be in the interest of that person or entity that you are negotiating with, and sort of negotiate in a way that kind of becomes win-win situation. In a way, you're I'm like almost I'm negotiating for you, but implicit in that is also my own interest, right? In a way. So that way, I think, there's a lot more chance for success, because you're not sort of defending your position only, but you're also defending the position of the person or entity you're negotiating with, because they have interest behind their sort of negotiation. You have interest. If you can align the two together, they often can be a lot more successful, or they can be open for something that can push your interest as well. So to figure that out, obviously requires work. What's the interest of the entity or the person. But I think that can become very successful, because the person feel that you're not just sort of vouching for yourself, but for the both sides in a way.
I think that is absolutely crucial. And now that I know that, I don't know how we're ever going to negotiate again. We're going to go into the small group, so there's a chance to hear more wisdom from more of you. When we come back, we will not be hearing more pearls. I think we got a little bit of an overview here already that was very helpful. So we'll go for, I'm going to bring us back with about 6 minutes left, Heather, so we can do a wrap up.
Sure.
If that adds up to. So we'll go to discussion 2 and then come back for a wrap up.
That time just flew by.
So fast.
Well,
That was like super fast.
it was super fast.
That was a real transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're short, right? So I guess everyone's back. All right. So I don't know if there's any specific take-home message. This is obviously a very quick survey of a topic that we would have liked to get into in more detail, very important topics that we think are relevant all the way through careers and life. I do encourage you to go on my courses and have a look at some of the material if you feel like, I didn't really quite get all of that. But I felt in my discussion group anyway, people really were completely on top of it. Some of them had the same book that they've been reading on this. So I'm looking forward to an extremely functional set of negotiations in this faculty going forward. So thanks, Michelle, for taking us through that section. Now, in the last few minutes, I just kind of wanted to come back to the overview of this program that you're part of, that you may hazily recall was supposed to be wrapping up around about now. And instead we missed a workshop. So normally there would have been one more workshop, and you may or may not have missed a small group meeting. Did any of you manage to have a small group meeting? There was one more left. Celia's got her hand up, maybe. So if that was supposed to be about research, although of course it could be about anything that was on your mind. Celia, did it go okay? Were people able to get together?
Yeah, we got together. Not all of us, but I guess we were 3.
That's pretty good in a pandemic.
Yeah, virtually, of course.
Yes. So I encourage the other groups to I know that people are fatigued of Zoom and have a lot going on, and I don't want to add any burden, but I do think that you might enjoy getting together with your small group. You can follow the little guide for that session, which I think was something to do with research, or you can just hang out and exchange cocktail recipes or talk about stuff that came up in this workshop. But I encourage you to get together on Zoom between now and the end of this. So I wanted your input on how to end this. So we had in mind a final workshop that would be not as long, even before the pandemic intervened. It was planned to be shorter, focused more on celebrating coming to the end of the program. And we had even had it in mind to invite participants in the inaugural Telemachus program to join as well for part of it, to sort of get everyone together and see how things were going for them. And of course, many of you I know have only signed up for this workshop because you want the Telemachus mug. So it's totally true that the mugs are being made, and this year's are by the same ceramic artist, but a slightly different pattern. So it'll be distinguishing the inaugural class from this class. And in fact, they were supposed to be delivered to my front porch today. I'm not sure if they got here yet, but they're coming. We've seen the pictures, they look great. We don't really know when I would love to get together and give you these mugs. in person, even if it means setting it down and backing up while you come and pick it up after sanitizing it. That would still be better than Zoom. But I don't know when that will be possible. So one idea is just to kind of hang in there and see how things evolve. And if at all possible, have an in-person event, ideally with everyone, if worst case, maybe small group by small group. I'm not going to do it if you have to put on full PPE. I draw the line. But if it's safe for us to get together, that would be my own preference. But I'm waiting for your input. The alternative is to have another Zoom workshop like this to do a sort of wrap up. That would be an hour, hour and a half, just a chance to kind of close the loop and hear your feedback and so on the whole program. And then we would arrange for you to get the mugs, the real mugs, not virtual mugs, you know, one way or another as we can. That'll be plan B. Is that okay with people? I know you joined us not because you wanted to spend time on Zoom with your colleagues, but because you wanted to spend time in person. Okay.
Yeah, I like the first suggestion, Leslie. To see in the fall we could, you know, get together somehow would be a nice way to end it.
Yeah. Okay. So ideally, we're going to beat this pandemic, so we can have a Telemachus in-person workshop where everyone's safe and healthy. And
you did not say when, within which time frame, though.
And we're going to do that. I can't say when, but soon. But I don't want the Telemachus thing to drag on forever. If it looks like we're really not going to be able to meet safely in groups, you know, before the midpoint of the next semester, then we'll go to plan B. And I see a lot of if we do go to plan B, we will, I think, try to include the previous Telemachus group somehow in the discussion so that you can let us know who they are. Thank you to the many of you who've been turning out for our sort of Telemachus spin-off, the Faculty Helping Faculty initiative that was inspired by Telemachus principles and facilitated by many people here. Thank you very much for coming and giving time to that. That was so successful that we're gonna carry it on in some informal form starting later in August. So watch out for that too if you wanna just have a more drop-in type of group mentorship and gossip fest or whatever it was, a chance to see people. Are there any comments, questions about what we did today or about the program in general? Either type or just shout out. Okay.
And
It was
feel
all
free
very
to
clear.
email us later if something comes up.
Yeah, okay.
I
So
have a quick question. I have colleagues who are asking me about this program. How can they participate? Is it by invitation? Should they contact the chair, or how does it work?
well, you were all hand selected because of your outstandingness. We will do it again, I believe. We haven't discussed, but my plan anyway is to do it again. And normally the time frame we follow is we recruit towards the end of the fall semester. Let's say November, December, we recruit, and then we would try to launch a new iteration in January-ish for another year and a half, and hopefully it won't be disrupted by global events, and actually just take about a year and a half. So if people are interested, they could send Heather an email to make sure their name's on the list. We'll send a general outreach. We do outreach to chairs. We do a general call, or we have. But if people want to make sure they hear about it, they could send Heather an email, the same address you've been getting all this helpful advice from her on, just to make sure that they're on the list to be contacted about it. And so far we've been able to accommodate everyone who's interested. In the meantime, if they want to get a taste of it, they're welcome to come to the faculty things, which will be generally broadcast when they restart later in August. Yeah, so thanks for asking that question. We are happy to take referrals of people who might be interested in doing this. We do want a real cross-section of the whole faculty. So any career stage, any background, any interest, any geography, we'll welcome them. All right, thank you so much for turning out. I am so glad we got to the end of this workshop. Thanks a lot, Michelle, Heather, and John. Leah, I probably forgot somebody. And thank you all for attending. And we will either see you in person or in Zoom land some point in the fall. Try to find some time to rest a little bit this summer. Good luck with this transition that we're all surviving. We'll get there.
Everybody put in into this. Thank you so much, Leslie.
No problem. This is a group work of many people, and always fun. Okay, have a good summer. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.